Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is Christian here. Thank you so much for joining me today. So today we are going to be discussing the new Urban Decay Elements palette. So this is what they've released for holiday 2018 along with some other things, but today this is what we're going to be focusing on. I have been wearing this palette exclusively for the last week. It is the palette that I do have on my eye, so this is not a first impression. I have thoroughly tested all of the shadows in the palette. I think there's one shade that I did not use in this entire palette. So I have a pretty good understanding of what the actual formulation is. And if this palette was on your radar and you are curious about the shades, how they blend, how they work, how they wear on the eye, and all that amazingly good information, then you were in the right place. We also might pull out a couple of their older palettes, like for example, the palette from last year whose name I have forgotten. This is the palette that they released for holiday 2017. This was an all shimmer palette. So we are going to be comparing it maybe a little bit to this guy, seeing if we have any crossover shades. Urban Decay does claim that this is a 19 brand new shades. So I'd be curious to see if there are similar shades in between some of their existing palettes. So if you're interested in my thoughts, my opinions, and my review on this palette, then you were in the right place and you're gonna wanna go ahead and keep on watching. Alright, so like I mentioned, this is the Urban Decay Elements palette. This is the unicarton here. And then this is what the back looks like. And then when you open it up, you get the UD logo along with the Elements palette on the back. And then when you open it up, you get 19 different shades in this particular palette. You get 3 true mattes, 1 matte that has a little bit of a glitter base, and the rest are going to be more metallic and shimmery and pearlized shades. So this palette does retail for $52. It can pretty much be purchased, I believe, anywhere that Urban Decay is sold. So of course on their Urban Decay website, Sephora, Macy's. I saw it on QVC. I believe I also saw it on Macy's if I'm not mistaken. So this is not going to be limited to one retailer or the other. So when you open the palette up, you kind of have your 19 shades laid out with your center shade here. And then you kind of have, it's kind of like a little bit of like a constellation situation happening. So Urban Decay kind of says when they describe this palette that it is a constellation of shadows that is orbiting around the center shade Luna, which is kind of like an iridescent transforming shade. I don't know if you guys can see the symbol on the inside. This is the symbols of the different elements inside the center of the palette here. So the shades in here are going to represent the 4 main elements, which are air, earth, fire, and water. Fire is going to be represented with more oranges and reds. Earth is going to be, of course, like your more earthy tones, your more of browns and greens. Air is going to be associated with blues, whites, and yellows. And then, of course, water is going to be associated with the shade blue. So upon first looking at this particular palette, when you think of the theme, which is elements, I think that they are pretty true to the actual colors of the actual elements themselves. The only one that I would say might be a little bit lacking is of course fire. There is no real red shades in this particular palette. I mean, you get one that's going to be a little bit more on the burgundy-ish side, but not a true red and no true oranges. But I do think that earth is well represented with the browns and the greens. Of course, you have your blues in here as well. I do think that overall this palette is pretty spot on when it comes to elements. I do think that there are a couple colors that could have been added and maybe 1 or 2 that could have been taken out to represent an elements palette a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and talk about the actual eyeshadows for just a second themselves. We have the shade Luna, which is described as a white shimmer with iridescent micro sparkle. Then we have the shade Silver Burn, which is a smoky purple with pink iridescent sparkle. Then we have Fortune Teller, which is a metallic pink with red and green 3D sparkle, which is like a shimmer, which is like a similar shade to MAC's like blue brown pigment kind of. Then we have Hex Remedy, which is a bright purple with iridescent sparkle. Then you get Tectonic, which is a chocolate brown with iridescent micro sparkle. Then you get Moon Rock, which is a metallic copper with iridescent sparkle, which is Fool's Gold, which is a metallic gold. So those are the shades in the inner rim here. And then we're going to go ahead and start here and then work our way around. You have a Sapphire Dream, which is a bright navy blue metallic. Then you get Electric Air, which is a pink silver with iridescent micro glitter. Then we get the first matte shade, which is probably not going to show up very well on my skin. This is the shade Antidote, which is described as a soft, warm nude. Then we have the shade Secret Keeper, which is a bright green satin with gold shift. Then we have the shade Earthbound, which is a forest green satin. It's with tonal micro shimmer. Then we have the next matte shade, which is Elemental, which is considered a sienna matte. Then we have the shade Volcanic, which is described as a bronze metallic. The shade Lioness, which is described as a smoky burgundy satin with bronze sparkle. The shade Firestarter, which is a deep red with gold micro glitter. Then you have the shade Dream Weaver, which is a bright pink matte. And then we have the shade Ego, which is a soft pink purple with a blue micro shimmer. And then we have the shade Heavy Water, which is a bright metallic teal. Alright guys, so that was all of the different colors swatched for you up close and personal with a shade description. So now let's go ahead and get into the actual review. So again, the colors that you are going to be matte are going to be the shades Antidote, which is this guy right here, Elemental, which is this guy right here, Dream Weaver, which is this one here, and Firestarter, which is this guy here. Everything else in the palette is going to be shimmery, metallic-y, or like a high shine. The one thing that I notice about this particular palette, or the one thing that I do think that is lacking in order to complete a look, I mean, you can definitely make a look work. So basically what I did today is I applied Antidote and Elemental in my crease, and then I went in with all three of these shades right here, and then I took Earthbound a little bit into the crease, a little bit to kind of deepen it up, not fully into the crease, but just enough to get a little depth in the dimension on my outer corner. I know that that's one thing that I personally struggled with when I was trying to complete looks. Every look that I created, I feel like came out really nice and really pretty, but I had to go in with a lot of shimmers in the crease, and that was a little bit harder for me to personally do myself, especially with my hooded eyes. If you have a natural crease, I don't think that that would really be too much of an issue for you at all. Applying shimmers into the crease, I think it could probably look really nice. But for me personally, like when you take some of these greens here and some of these blues, or this is a little bit of a darker, richer purple, and you have just these two lighter to mid-tone browns, you don't really have a lot to ground those deeper, darker shades in the palette. So that is a negative for me. In the Sephora favorites video that I filmed, that should already be up on my channel, I took the shade Firestarter into my crease, and I basically just kind of loosened or tightened the pressure on my brush a little bit to get the color to be a little bit deeper, or a little bit of a wash of color, so that way I could get a little bit more depth and dimension just trying to use that one shade. But I noticed that when I went in with the darker shades on my lid, I was looking for something to kind of deepen up my outer corner a little bit. So that is the only drawback to me that this palette actually has. I wish that there had been maybe two more deeper, richer mattes, maybe a deeper, richer green, or, you know, a darker brown, or even like a blue, like a matte blue would have been pretty nice, because you can pair a lot of these different colors with a matte blue or a matte green or a darker brown. So that is pretty much for me the only downside to this palette. Of course, depending on how you look at it, if you have a bunch of different neutrally palettes or single shadows, I don't know how much of an issue that would be, because you can just pull from a different palette. But for those of you who don't like to pull from different palettes and you just want to use whatever you're working with, that's just something to take note of. However, with that being said, if you take your time blending the darker shimmers or the metallics into the creases, into the crease of your eye, you definitely can get a complete look. It's just that we're so accustomed to not putting shimmers in our crease that you think, oh my gosh, I can't do that. But that is the only negative to me about this particular palette. So today I actually did my foundation before applying my eye makeup, which I never do. I always apply my eye makeup first. So I did notice with the greens that there was a little bit of fallout on my under eye. Not a lot, not a ton at all, and it was easily swept away. Fallout doesn't personally bother me. I never noticed fallout with any of the matte shades themselves, just today when I applied the shimmers on my lids. and I apply them in a packing motion, no sweeping motion, and I found that that is what works best with these particular shimmers. I have never used any of them wet. I wish I had, so I can let you know what kind of impact that gave. I used every single shadow dry in this particular palette every time I used it, and I always got the color payoff that I wanted. Of course, you can go in with your finger as well, and that will give you a little bit of a better payoff. It'll give you a little bit more richness and pigmentation on the actual eye. Now, applying the brush, like applying just with the brush, which is what I do mostly, MAC 242 packing motions. I never had any real issues with any of the shades. The matte shades do kick up some powder in the actual pan themselves, but on the eye, they blend perfectly. I didn't have any issues with patchiness, skipping, dryness, nothing like that. I feel like they worked really, really well on the eye. I just, especially for somebody who might have a little bit of a deeper skin tone, I just wish that they had put something a little bit richer and deeper for a matte shade in this particular palette. Now, the shade right here, the center shade right here, which all of the other shades orbit around, this is going to be what you can consider a transforming shade. So no matter what shimmer or metallic you put on your eye, if you put this particular shade over your eye, it's going to, over the colors used, it's going to give you a little bit more of a duochrome, reflective kind of situation, and it's actually really, really pretty. This is not a shade that I would wear by itself. Out of all of the shimmers, I would consider this one to be probably the most chunky, but I think it's because you're not really meant to wear it on its own. I think that this is a very nice palette. I think it's a pretty well-rounded palette, minus the negatives that I've already given. I think it's easy to use. I think that this is a really nice formulation, you guys. I know a lot of people are very hit and miss with Urban Decay eyeshadows, but personally for myself, I think that they work really well. I think that they have, again, your neutrals. I think that this palette overall is pretty neutral. So if you're over neutrals or if you're sick of neutral shadows, this might not be the one for you. But the reason why I say, you know what, it's okay that it's a mostly neutral palette. I mean, it's an elements palette, so I mean, were you really gonna get some pastel greens in here? You know what I mean? So I think that it's pretty true to the theme of the actual palette itself, again, except for maybe fire. I think maybe they missed the mark on fire a little bit, but they do have this shade in here, so they kind of covered their base. I'm pretty sure they're considering the shade Dream Reaver to fall under the fire category as well, even though that shadow does lean a little bit more on the pinky tone side. I mean, I will say, this brown does have a little bit of an orange undertone to it, but it's definitely more of a mid-tone brown that would fall under the earth element. I think that the packaging of this palette is really nice. I think it's just a well-executed, easy-to-use, pretty palette. Of course, if you owned, so this is the palette from holiday 2017, and of course this is going to be an all shimmer palette here, and this is going to be a mostly shimmer palette here with, again, those 3 true mattes and 1 matte with a glitter or 1 matte that has glitter reflex or glitter chunks thrown into it. So as you can see, even though Urban Decay says that this is 19 new eyeshadows, you can definitely see that you can probably, minus the mattes, get very similar looks from this palette versus this one. So if you own the palette from last year, I don't know if you will necessarily need the new one. And then you also have the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, which retails for less than this guy. I believe the Urban Decay Born to Run was either $45 or $49. I can't remember off the top of my head. This one comes with 21 shadows, and 9 of those are matte, where 19 shadows and 4 are matte. And I feel like the Urban Decay Born to Run palette could also really benefit or kind of take the same look onto the Elements palette as well. So if you look here, there are definitely some similarities across some of the eyeshadows. Of course, the Born to Run doesn't have those beautiful blues, but they have the greens, they have the coppers, and they have some of the purples. Now, I will say that if you are somebody who wants to get a completed look and only have to reach for one palette and not have to worry about putting shimmers into the crease or glitters or metallics into the crease, then you might be better off with the Born to Run palette, because you can definitely get a full look out of this particular eyeshadow palette. Now, with that being said, I do think that this is beautiful, and I do definitely think that it is worth the $52, and I have had a fun time using this palette throughout the last week, and I have been able to get different looks every single time I've applied it. I've gotten very neutral looks, I've gotten purpley looks. Today I've gotten something green, and you know, I have multiple shades on my eyes today. They blend well, they worked well, and all in all, this is a cohesive palette. So do I think it's worth the money? Yes. Do I think that that it's a good palette. Yes. If you were sick of the, you know, Vice palettes that Urban Decay was releasing every single year, this is something a little bit different. Now, of course, Vice palettes tended to also be very metallic, shimmer, heavy. I think that that's just what Urban Decay does for the holiday. I don't know why, they just love a good shimmer, but they love a good shimmer. So if you were on the fence about this particular palette and whether or not it's worth the money, I definitely do think it is. I definitely think it's a good staple. I'll have a really enjoyable time reaching for this throughout the coming months and compare it to other holiday palettes, which of course I have some Tarte palettes and some Too Faced palettes that we're going to be talking about next. I haven't tried those yet because, again, I want to do no first impressions. First impressions are cool and they're a great way to get, you know, a video out quicker and sooner, but you don't really get to go into as much detail. So I don't plan on doing any first impressions on any of the holiday releases. I want to test them out and try them out. So the next palette that I'll probably be going into is the Tarte or the Too Faced. I'm not sure yet. I think the Tarte one, the big pineapple one. But typically speaking, in forms of shadow formulation and things like that, I do think that Urban Decay is one of the brands that does do it, you know, pretty consistently. Alright guys, alright, so that is my thoughts and opinions on the new Urban Decay Elements palette. If you were on the fence about it or thinking about picking it up, I definitely think it is worth taking a look at. If you are still on the fence, go ahead and go into the store and give it some swatches and you will be pleasantly surprised. So this particular palette gets 2 thumbs up from me. I thoroughly enjoy it and I think that Urban Decay knocked it out of the park yet again. I'm kind of excited to be seeing something a little bit different. Elements, I don't know, maybe that's going to be the next trend. Who knows? We'll see. But I think that the packaging is beautiful. I think that the color layout is really nice as well. Yes, there's a little bit of wasted space. For those of you who like more compact palettes, I will put that out there as well. But all in all, I think it was a really well executed palette and I definitely think it is worth taking a look at. So far for holiday 2018 makeup eyeshadowy palettes, we're starting out really good, you guys. So if you were interested in more holiday palettes and in-depth thorough reviews of all of the different eyeshadow palettes that are coming out, then I am your girl. You're going to want to go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below just to make sure you do not miss any holiday makeup releases or just makeup in general. Hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up and a comment, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.